implication of all of this to me is, in the past, in the 20th century, whether you are an advocate of that belief or not, there have been three major agricultural revolutions that have saved lives. The number one was in the 1930s, the hybrid corn technology that started in North America and developed the agro industry in that country and in Western Europe, and led to the second agricultural revolution that took place in the 1960s, and that is the Green Revolution that spread into Asia and Latin America, increasing food productivity on the farmer's field, feeding more people. And the third is the biotechnology revolution that came in the 1980s. I've told you on what I believe the positive contributions have been there, but it's also the one that is heavily debated today is some of these technologies have also come at a price in our ecosystem. And that, for example, a crop like this, I went to a photographer in my university about 2 weeks ago. This year, the crop in America is very, very excellent. It's beautiful. They're estimating high level of production in corn and soybeans. And the expectation is many of these fields are going to be 250 bushels of corn. That's a lot of kilograms of corn. So I said, Tom, can you get me a crop, a 250 bushel cornfield, and take a picture of it? This picture, you can tell from this density of the crop and so on, it's going to produce a lot, all right? But to be able to produce, there are certain management practices that have been taken to make this crop this successful. But, so we can argue that instead of maybe 150 kilograms of nitrogen or so that went into it, I don't know what went into it, it could have been a lot less. And it could be potentially be optimized. But what I hope you would agree with me was some kind of productivity agriculture is going to be needed in the world for us to be feeding humanity. And so in the same way, we don't need a 250 bushels corn. What determines whether a farmer produced this is not the science that was given to him. It is the decision of the individual. It's an individual pushing the envelope to the limit and calculating whether or not that technology is profitable to him. And so the currency that counts in the minds of that farmer is profitability and not economic or environmental sustainability. About the same time, we have other parts of the world that don't produce high yields. If you look at the pockets of the world that have high yield environments, they're very, very limited. North America, small area in Southern America, small area in Western Europe, and a small area in the Far East. The rest of the world doesn't have a lot of fertile land that could be brought into cultivation. And there is a talk, and I'll come back and talk to you about a large acreage of land that is undeveloped in some pockets of the world that people are looking at as an opportunity. I talked about the high level of fertilizers and inputs that went into producing that high yield of corn. But when you look at the rate of fertilizer used around the world, even though this scale is not very good, in many developed world, including Europe and North America, 100 kilogram nitrogen is very common. But look at Africa, the yellow line below. Since independence until now, the average use of nitrogen fertilizer in Africa is 8 to 10 kilograms per acre on the continent basis. So there is a lot of room over there to increase the fertility, improve the fertility of the conditions in Africa through artificial scientific means. But there are also, in addition to productivity limits that we talked about, one of the challenges I listed is the fragility of our ecosystem, suggesting that in the 20th century, we were able to feed more mouths by increasing production through this yield-enhancing productivity technology. But maybe now we need to be a lot more sensitive because of some of the concerns that were expressed both in the industrial expansion in North America and Europe, as well as in the Green Revolution technologies in Asia. Some of that may have taken place at the expense of the ecosystem. And therefore, we need to be very sensitive to that. In addition to our production practices, the other aspect of it is, here is burning and cutting forests down to bring more land to agriculture through deforestation. And here is the distribution of all of those red dots that you see are the deforestation that is taking place very actively around the world, changing a lot of ecosystems in the process. It's not only the land being degraded, it's not only the forests that are being cut, but also the biodiversity around that is being destroyed. And estimates are about 17 million hectares per year are being deforested this way around the world. Slash and burning. And this is a satellite picture in Mato Grosso area in Brazil. And that a lot of smoke that is blanketing much of the Amazon that was captured with satellite pictures in the slash burning that has taken place to bring more land to cultivation in some of these areas of the world. So if we say that we shouldn't use high level of inputs because it's not good for our environment, if we say that we shouldn't burn or cut more forests because we're degrading our environment, where are we getting more land to bring under cultivation? It is estimated around the world there are approximately 12 to 15% of more arable land that can be brought into cultivation anymore. This is without cutting forests. If you don't want to cut forests, there are only about 12 to 15% more arable land. Out of that, some 60% of that land is in the continent of Africa. And that has led to the land grab, the land rush that you may have heard about. A lot of organizations, particularly from China, India, and the Middle East, and some also from Western Europe and North America that have rushed to the continent of Africa to get more land for their future, as a guarantee and future of their economies and their people to feed them in the years to come. The other challenge I listed is food loss. And I want to create a distinction, if it is not clear in the minds of some people. There are food losses that are arising at the pre-harvest loss, post-harvest loss, losses on the farm, in transportation, and losses that are taking place because there is no market and people are dumping food that is already produced. In general, this is a problem not in Europe, not in North America, but this is a problem in many developing countries where the technology for storage, for transportation, for market opportunities, for freezing and drying and so on, the things that Europe had done hundreds of years ago that are not being practiced in Africa today. The technology has always been there in some form, but it has not reached Africa. And so there are huge losses and opportunities there that could save food losses in crops that are being developed and produced in Africa. And at the same time, the other is creating markets, regional market, local markets, global markets for African farmers so that they could be competitive in the global market agenda. Storage and transportation that I already mentioned, and that today it is uncommon, it is very common in Europe to move food from here to Latin America, to Africa, to Australia, and so on. But in Africa, one of the biggest limitations for Africa to get in the global market is not only the technology that they have, particularly technology of port technology in packaging and collecting crops and moving and transportation of food from one region to another. It is sometimes more cheaper to move something from Africa to Europe than it is from one end of one country to another on land because of transportation costs. There are also food losses in storage. For example, one of the countries that have really made dramatic change from becoming from a food basket from a bread basket to a food basket is really India because of getting more technologies producing food. But today, the figure of 20% to 30% of grain in Indian storages are lost every year because of the poor storage conditions. So there is a lot that can be improved in losses. One of the other things that are in losses that I have not talked about is the food waste. The food waste that takes place more in the developed countries, in Western Europe and North America. Food that has already been produced are being wasted for one reason or another. Mostly carelessness, but also as a result of legal issues that are there. Because people are afraid to be sued, and therefore it's easier to throw away good food and labeling requirements and so on. Food that can be consumed by some sector is thrown away. And so developed nations have a food waste problem, developing countries have food loss problem, and safety issues can affect both developed and developing countries because there are problems on both sides. And there is also a nutrition agenda that we consider in much of our dialogue quantity and very few, not quality, is being discussed. And nutrition of food is an important insecurity agenda that is there. There are food security, there is nutrition security, that is very important, and associated risk there is obesity issue that has become a pandemic around the world. So those are the existing problems that are getting bigger, but then there are new emerging challenges that we call the grand challenges that have emerged. The climate change, the looming water crisis, the energy demand and use, and also the global trade. Global trade is also a very important agenda. So these are, to me, emerging challenges in a competitive global market today that have awakened us all around the world to be worrying about the security of food production in the future. And these are huge problems that require a totally different set of science and technology than what we have used in the past. And therefore, these skills, because the problems are complex, each one of these bring, they are going to require more holistic, transdisciplinary agenda, what we call transdisciplinary agenda that is going to be very necessary to engage in that manner, which are more holistic. And to be able to do that, we need to develop that science and technology and skill set to be able to address these issues. And so these are problems both in developing countries and developed countries that we will have to worry about. Climate change is more prominent. Temperature changes are seen more in the Arctic, associated with this ice melting, and that is seen in this picture. And the data is very clear, by and large. The data is very clear because we've been monitoring about carbon dioxide concentration and find that in the last 250 years, you look at it, it's overly flat until it comes into the last few years in historical perspective, about 250 years, where carbon dioxide concentration has increased. It's been associated with fossil fuel burning and deforestation by and large. And that is monitored by the reduction of carbon-14 in the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and the data has been mapped for years. And it's very clear, showing us that this is not a natural phenomena, it's a man-made phenomena. And so the utilization of fossil fuels and the deforestation of land has contributed heavily to this. And so 80% of the energy utilized around the world comes out of fossil fuel. And so as economies improve in China and India, there's going to be more demand of energy.